At 11:45 p.m., while a violent storm covered St. Peter's Square in darkness, the heart of the Vatican remained strangely silent. Inside the private chambers of the Apostolic Palace, Pope Leo XIV sat alone behind his ancient wooden desk, staring at a forgotten leather binder that seemed to carry the weight of decades of hidden history. The worn cover carried the seal of Pope Paul VI and a faded date written beneath it, October 14th, 1976. For 50 years, this document had officially never existed. It had never been registered in the Vatican archives, never mentioned in official transitions, and never included in the confidential briefings given to new popes. It had remained hidden inside a secret compartment of an old mahogany cabinet within the Secretariat of State, until a young archivist discovered it during a routine inspection. But what shocked everyone was not only the existence of the binder, it was the warning stamped across the cover in Latin, a message ordering that it be destroyed after the death of the reigning pope. Yet 4 popes had passed and the document had survived, silently waiting in the shadows. Pope Leo understood that objects buried for decades often carried dangerous truths, and he hesitated before breaking the fragile seal. When he finally opened the binder, he expected to find a forgotten theological debate or an old diplomatic record. Instead, the first page contained something far more disturbing. A list of powerful names, including cardinals, political figures, financial leaders, and international influencers, connected to enormous sums of money and a secret agreement known as Protocol 76. The pages revealed a hidden arrangement created during the political chaos of the late 20th century, a deal that appeared to exchange moral silence for institutional survival. As Leo continued reading, the reality became impossible to ignore. The Vatican had not simply endured decades of political pressure, it had survived by making compromises that could damage the very foundation of its moral authority. The document was not a piece of history. It was evidence of a system that had continued for generations. The rain outside continued falling, but inside the study, Leo felt the weight of a truth that could shake the entire church. The names in the document were not arranged randomly. They represented levels of influence, power, and control. At the top was Cardinal Aristin, a figure whose reputation had grown over the decades, and who had eventually risen within the highest circles of the church. Below him were powerful financial figures connected to Vatican operations and international banking networks. Protocol 76 described a complex web of asset movements, political agreements, and financial strategies designed to protect the Vatican from external threats. But to Leo, it looked less like protection and more like a hidden burden passed from one generation of leadership to another. The door of the study slowly opened, breaking the silence. Father Marco Benedetti entered carrying a glass of water, his expression filled with concern. He knew the Pope had been awake for hours and had ignored every request to rest. "Your Holiness," he said quietly, "the Secretary of State has been calling. The upcoming synod preparations cannot be delayed." Leo closed the binder, but left it sitting openly on the desk. He no longer saw it as a document. He saw it as a responsibility. "Tell them the synod is no longer our greatest concern," Leo replied, his voice colder than usual. "Bring me every personnel file connected to the Secretariat of State from 1976. Secure the archives. Lock the doors." Benedetti looked toward the binder and immediately understood that this was not a simple administrative matter. The Pope was not searching for an old mistake. He was searching for the truth behind an entire system. After Benedetti left, Leo walked toward the window overlooking Rome. The Eternal City had survived wars, divisions, and countless crises, but now he wondered whether the Church could survive the truth hidden within itself. He knew he had only 2 choices: protect the institution by keeping silent, or risk everything by exposing what had been hidden for half a century. As dawn approached, Leo began connecting the names, dates, and financial records inside Protocol 76. The deeper he went, the clearer the pattern became. The binder was not simply a record of the past. It was a map of influence that reached into the present. The secret agreement had created a network of dependency that still affected Vatican affairs. What disturbed Leo most was the possibility that the church he had spent his life serving had been forced into a cycle where protecting the institution became more important than protecting the truth. Then came a sudden knock at the door. Before Leo could respond, Cardinal Vane, the Vatican Secretary of State, entered the room. His expression remained calm, but his eyes immediately moved toward the open binder. He did not need an explanation. He already knew. "I see the archive inspection was successful," Vane said. He walked slowly toward the desk. "That document was never meant for your eyes, Holy Father. It was supposed to disappear with the men who created it." Leo remained seated, his hand resting firmly on the page. "This is not only a record of past mistakes, Cardinal. It is proof of a problem that may still exist today." Vane stopped and looked directly at him. "Some people know, some have suspected. Others have spent years protecting the system built around that document. You are looking at the foundation of the modern Vatican, Holy Father. If you remove that stone, the entire structure may collapse. Leo stared at him, realizing that the crisis was no longer about a hidden document from 1976. It was about the very purpose of leadership. Was he chosen to protect an institution or to protect the truth behind it? As Cardinal Vane walked away, Leo understood one thing clearly. The battle had already begun. The footsteps of Cardinal Vane slowly disappeared through the marble corridors, but his warning remained inside Pope Leo XIV's mind like an echo. The Vatican had always appeared to the world as a symbol of faith, tradition, and stability, but Leo now understood that beneath the beauty of its ancient walls existed a complicated network of secrets, alliances, and carefully protected information. He stood alone in his study, staring at the closed door, knowing that Vane was not simply a powerful official. He was the guardian of a system that had survived for decades by controlling what was revealed and what remained hidden. Leo realized that every movement inside the apostolic palace was monitored, every conversation could be recorded, and every person around him could have divided loyalties. If he followed normal procedures, Vane would know immediately. The Pope could not fight this battle through official channels. He needed someone whose loyalty was not connected to politics, influence, or personal ambition. Walking into the small private kitchen attached to his study, Leo turned on the water faucet and allowed the sound to fill the room, creating a barrier against possible listening devices. Sitting quietly on the cold floor, he removed a simple black fountain pen from his pocket and wrote a message on plain paper rather than official Vatican stationery. The person he needed was Archbishop Elena Rossetti. For years, Rossetti had worked within the Vatican's communication structure, understanding the hidden tensions and silent struggles inside the institution. She was intelligent, cautious, and most importantly, Leo believed her loyalty came from faith rather than power. He wrote a short message containing no names, no locations, and no direct references. To anyone else, it would appear meaningless, but Rossetti would understand exactly what it meant. Folding the paper carefully, Leo placed it inside the hidden pocket of his cassock. Before making his next move, he needed confirmation. Protocol 76 contained financial details that suggested the agreement was not only a historical event, but something that could still influence modern Vatican operations. If money connected to that agreement continued moving through current accounts, then the problem was no longer about past mistakes. It meant the present leadership was still connected to the consequences of that decision. Leo walked back to his desk and reached for an old private telephone line, one of the few remaining connections that bypassed the Vatican's central communication system. He entered a number he had memorized years earlier, a direct line to Commander Rossi of the Swiss Guard. Rossi was not a politician. He was a soldier trained to protect the office of the Pope itself, not the interests of individual officials. If anyone could help Leo move unseen inside the Vatican, it was him. Before sunrise, Leo entered the Vatican gardens, where the quiet paths and flowing fountains created one of the few places where private conversations could happen without immediate attention. The city was still asleep, covered in the peaceful darkness before dawn. A few minutes later, Archbishop Elena Rossetti arrived. She immediately recognized that this was not a normal meeting. The urgency in Leo's message had brought her there before sunrise, and the seriousness in his expression confirmed her fears. They walked to a secluded stone bench beneath an old cedar tree, away from the eyes of the Vatican's crowded corridors. Leo did not bring the binder. Carrying it would have been too dangerous. Instead, he repeated the most important names, dates, and financial figures from Protocol 76. As Rossetti listened, her calm professional expression slowly disappeared. The information connected directly to events she had questioned years earlier. "Your Holiness," she whispered, "these numbers match the accounts that were protected during the Vatican financial reforms decades ago. We were told they existed to preserve independence and protect the Church from outside pressure." Leo looked toward the rising sunlight touching the dome of St. Peter's Basilica. "It was never only about independence," he said. "It was about survival. They created protection through secrecy, and now we are still paying the price." Rossetti understood immediately what was at stake. She had spent years studying the Vatican's internal structure, and she knew the consequences of exposing something this powerful. "If you investigate this openly, they will not attack the past," she warned. "They will attack the present. They will say you are damaging the Church, weakening its mission, and creating unnecessary chaos." Leo looked directly at her. "I'm not trying to damage the Church. I'm trying to save its purpose. A church cannot guide people toward truth while hiding from its own history." Rossetti remained silent for a moment before finally nodding. She knew what had to happen. "I will need access to the restricted accounts, the ones hidden from normal economic reviews. But if I open those files, Vane will know." Leo's expression hardened. "Then let him know. If he reacts, he will reveal what he is trying to protect." The Vatican had become a battlefield where information was the weapon and silence was the shield. Later that morning, Leo moved through the corridors of the apostolic palace with careful control, pretending everything was normal while knowing that every step was being observed. He understood the invisible system around him, cameras, informants, and officials who reported every unusual action. Cardinal Vane had spent years creating this structure of control, but Leo believed every structure had a weakness. He descended into the older underground sections of the Vatican, where ancient stone walls carried centuries of history. There, beneath the modern administration, he found Commander Rossi, waiting in the shadows near a forgotten altar. "Commander," Leo whispered, "I need your help securing the area between the archives and the papal apartments. There is an envelope that must be moved somewhere beyond the reach of the current system." Rossi remained silent for a moment. He understood the danger immediately. "Holy Father, that area is controlled by the Secretariat of State. If I change security patterns, Vane will know." Leo looked at him carefully. "If you do nothing, the secret of 50 years will remain buried forever. This is not a political operation. This is a confession. The Church cannot survive if it forgets how to speak the truth." Rossi struggled between his duty and the danger ahead. He had heard rumors for years, stories whispered among Vatican guards about hidden struggles behind closed doors. Finally, he gave a small nod. "I will need a distraction." Leo already had a plan. He would create a moment that would force the entire Vatican security system to focus somewhere else. He would appear before the international press without warning, creating confusion and drawing attention away from the archives. While the world watched the Pope speak publicly, the truth would move quietly through the hidden paths beneath the Vatican. The battle for Protocol 76 had begun, and neither side could turn back. The Vatican press room had rarely witnessed a moment like this. Bright lights flooded the small stage, cameras from around the world focused toward the entrance, and journalists waited impatiently for answers they had not expected to receive. Pope Leo XIV walked onto the platform wearing his simple black cassock, his face showing the exhaustion of nearly 2 sleepless days, but his posture carried a determination that immediately changed the atmosphere. Behind the cameras, Cardinal Vane stood quietly among the officials, watching every movement with the careful attention of a man who knew something important was about to happen. He had expected a routine statement about the upcoming synod, international affairs, or the challenges facing the modern church. Instead, Leo stepped toward the microphone and allowed several seconds of complete silence to pass. The room became so quiet that even the sound of the air conditioning seemed unusually loud. The Pope looked across the crowd and began speaking slowly. "We often describe the church as a house built on truth," he said. "But every house depends on the strength of its foundation. And sometimes protecting that foundation requires us to open doors that have remained closed for too long." The reporters immediately reacted. They had arrived searching for ordinary headlines, but Leo's words suggested something far deeper. They exchanged glances, preparing their cameras and notebooks. Cardinal Vane remained expressionless, but Leo noticed the smallest change in his face, a tightening of the jaw, a brief moment of tension that revealed he understood the meaning behind the Pope's words. Leo continued carefully, speaking about responsibility, transparency, and the importance of facing difficult moments in history. He did not reveal Protocol 76. He did not mention names or documents. Instead, he created uncertainty, forcing everyone inside the Vatican to wonder what he knew and what he intended to do next. While the world focused on the Pope's speech, another operation was unfolding far away from the cameras. Commander Rossi and his trusted team were moving through the hidden sections of the Vatican, using the distraction created by the press conference. They had only a few minutes before security systems returned to normal attention. Every second mattered. The red binder containing Protocol 76 had to be moved from Leo's private study to a secure location where it could not be controlled by the Secretariat of State. The Vatican security network was designed to prevent exactly this type of action. But the unexpected press event had created confusion. Communications teams were focused on managing journalists. Security personnel were divided between protecting the Pope publicly and monitoring the internal situation. It was the only opening Leo would get. As Leo continued his speech, he felt a silent vibration from the hidden communication device. It was Rossi's signal. The binder had been successfully moved. For the first time since discovering the document, Leo allowed himself a brief moment of relief. But he knew the most dangerous part was still ahead. He had not defeated the system. He had only moved one piece on a much larger board. When the press conference ended, the Vatican entered a strange period of silence. It was not the peaceful silence of prayer. It was the silence before a storm. Leo returned to his private study, waiting for confirmation from Rossi, and preparing for the reaction he knew would come. Minutes passed, then more minutes, but no message arrived. The phone on his desk remained silent. The absence of communication began to feel heavier than any warning. Something had gone wrong. The atmosphere inside the Apostolic Palace changed quickly. The familiar footsteps of Vatican guards outside his door were replaced by unfamiliar voices and movements. Leo approached the entrance, but when he attempted to open it, the heavy wooden door refused to move. It had not been locked by a simple mechanism. Someone had activated an external security override. The Pope was trapped inside his own study. Before he could react, the old intercom system on his desk suddenly came alive. A calm voice filled the room. It was Cardinal Vane. "Your Holiness," Vane said politely, "the synod preparations are continuing successfully. We have taken certain precautions to ensure that you are able to rest after the pressure of recent events." Leo immediately understood the meaning behind those words. "Open the door, Cardinal." There was a pause. Then Vane replied in the same controlled tone. "I am afraid that cannot happen yet. We need to discuss the matter of the misplaced document you have been investigating." Leo's expression changed slightly. "Where is Commander Rossi?" he asked. Vane's silence lasted only a moment, but it was enough. "Commander Rossi eventually remembered where his true responsibility lies," Vane said. "His loyalty is to the Church as an institution, not to a decision that could destroy it." The word struck Leo harder than he expected. Rossi had been compromised. The binder was gone. The carefully planned operation had failed. For a moment it appeared that everything was lost, but Vane had made one mistake. He believed Leo was only a modern leader dependent on official systems, digital records, and administrative authority. He forgot that Leo was also a historian of the Church, a man who understood the ancient architecture of the Vatican better than many officials who controlled its modern operations. Standing alone in the locked room, Leo looked around carefully. The electronic security system was new, but the palace itself was centuries old. The solution was not hidden in technology, it was hidden in history. His eyes moved toward an enormous tapestry hanging on the wall, one depicting the keys of St. Peter. He approached it slowly and pulled the heavy fabric away from the wall. Behind it was something almost forgotten. A narrow passage door built centuries earlier for servants and messengers who needed to move through the palace without being seen. The passage was covered in dust and darkness, but Leo knew exactly where it led. It connected the private apartments to older underground sections of the Vatican. Without hesitation, he entered the hidden path. As he moved through the narrow space, surrounded by the smell of ancient stone and forgotten documents, he realized he was literally walking through the hidden foundations of the institution he was trying to save. Above him, he could hear the movement of Vane's security team searching his study, unaware that their target had already disappeared. After a long journey through the forgotten corridors, Leo reached a restricted archive area. Below, he saw a small light glowing in the darkness. Someone was still there. It was Father Benedetti. The Pope's secretary had not followed Vane's orders. Instead, he was sitting beside an emergency computer terminal, preparing to protect whatever evidence remained. When Leo tapped a familiar pattern against the iron gate, Benedetti looked up in shock. Their eyes met, and both men understood the same thing. The battle was not over. The game had only moved to a place Cardinal Vane never knew existed. The underground archive remained completely silent except for the low mechanical hum of the emergency computer terminal. In the darkness of the restricted Vatican wing, Father Marco Benedetti sat in front of the screen, his hands moving quickly across the keyboard. He knew there was no longer any possibility of returning to normal life. The moment he decided to help the Pope, he had stepped beyond obedience and into a battle where the truth itself had become the greatest risk. The file transfer window remained open, waiting for the final confirmation. On the screen appeared the title of the document, Protocol of Silence. It was the digital copy of everything connected to the hidden agreement from 1976. Financial records, names, communications, and evidence that could reshape the world's understanding of the modern Vatican. Pope Leo XIV watched silently from behind the iron gate, understanding that this moment was bigger than his own position. This was no longer about protecting his reputation, his authority, or even his papacy. It was about whether an institution built on faith could finally confront its own mistakes. Benedetti looked back at him with fear in his eyes. "Your Holiness, once this leaves the Vatican, there is no way to control what happens next." Leo nodded slowly. "That is exactly why it must leave." The progress bar continued moving across the screen. 72%, 81%, 94%. Every second felt longer than the last. Somewhere above them, the Vatican security teams were closing in. Cardinal Vane had realized that something had changed. He knew Leo had escaped the locked room, and he knew there were only a few places where someone could move without appearing on modern surveillance systems. The old archives were one of them. Heavy footsteps began echoing through the ancient corridors. Benedetti heard them and froze. "They are coming," he whispered. Leo remained calm. He looked toward the approaching sound and then back at the computer screen. "Finish it!" The final percentage slowly appeared. 98%, 99%. Then the screen changed. Transfer complete. The evidence was no longer inside the Vatican. It had been sent beyond the reach of any single person or institution. Copies were delivered to independent journalists, historical organizations, legal experts, and international observers around the world. The secret that had survived for 50 years had finally entered the public record. Benedetti stepped away from the terminal, his hands shaking. He understood the consequences. Their careers could end. Their positions could disappear. They might even face accusations from those who believed they had betrayed the church. But despite the danger, there was also a strange sense of peace. The truth was no longer trapped behind locked doors. Suddenly, the heavy iron door shook violently. A powerful impact echoed through the archive. The old metal frame trembled. Another strike followed, louder than the first. Leo placed a hand on Benedetti's shoulder, offering reassurance to the man who had risked everything beside him. "Marco," Leo said quietly, "the church is not made of these walls. It is not made of gold, buildings, or positions of power. It exists because people believe in something greater than themselves, and those people deserve the truth." The door finally broke open. Cardinal Vane entered the room accompanied by security officials. For the first time, the confidence that had defined him was gone. He held a phone in his hand, and the screen displayed a breaking news notification from international media organizations. He looked at the computer terminal, then at Benedetti, and finally at Leo. He understood immediately. There was nothing left to hide. No document to destroy, no archive to control, no system powerful enough to erase what had already reached the world. "You have no idea what you have done," Vane said quietly, but his voice no longer carried the authority it once had. Leo looked at him with sadness rather than anger. "Perhaps," he replied, "but I know what we refused to do for 50 years. Vane remained silent. The battle was not won through power, influence, or political strategy. It was won because someone finally allowed the truth to exist. Leo walked past him through the ancient passage and emerged into the Vatican gardens as the first light of morning touched the city. The world around him looked unchanged, but everything was different. The secret that had weighed on generations of leaders was no longer hidden inside stone walls. It belonged to history now. The consequences would be enormous. The church would face criticism, questions, and painful reflection. Many would demand accountability, while others would question whether exposing such information had been the right decision. But Leo understood something important. Institutions do not become stronger by pretending they have never failed. They become stronger when they have the courage to admit those failures and rebuild with honesty. Standing beneath the morning sky, he realized that his greatest challenge had never been protecting the Vatican from the world. It had been protecting the truth from the Vatican itself. The age of controlled stories and carefully managed silence had ended. A new chapter had begun, one where faith would no longer depend on hidden agreements, but on the courage to face reality. And as the bells of St. Peter's Basilica rang across Rome, Pope Leo XIV knew that the hardest journey was not behind him. It was only beginning.